Welcome to Atlaz. Atlaz hadir untuk menyetarakan sistem pembelajaran bahasa Inggris di seluruh Indonesia. Pada generasi saat ini, sangat mengharuskan kita sebagai kaum muda untuk menguasai pelajaran bahasa Inggris untuk membuka jendela dunia dan menaklukkan isinya. Misi Atlaz adalah meningkatkan kualitas edukasi di Indonesia dengan memperbaiki materi pembelajaran dan cara pengajaran. Atlaz adalah sebuah platform belajar bahasa Inggris yang memadukan kurikulum nasional dengan standar CEFR. Dengan fitur pendukung Atlaz sebagai penunjang pembelajaran, kami memiliki fitur assessment, animated videos, lecture videos, interactive materials, Atlaz Zone, lesson plan, dan worksheet, teacher resources, dan gradebook. Karena materi kami sesuai dengan kurikulum nasional, maka buku kami juga dapat digunakan untuk sekolah negeri maupun sekolah swasta. Dan dengan kombinasi materi level CEFR, maka murid dapat secara maksimal menguasai bahasa Inggris. Kami memiliki fitur lesson plan yang dapat memudahkan guru dalam kegiatan belajar mengajar. Jadi, guru akan bisa lebih fokus untuk mengajar. Dengan teacher resources yang dapat membantu guru dan mengasah kreativitas dalam mengajar, native speaker kami akan memberikan tips dan solusi agar belajar menjadi lebih menarik. Selain itu, juga ada worksheet yang dapat diunduh oleh guru sebagai bahan soal latihan atau ulangan untuk murid. Ketika murid sudah mengerjakan Atlaz secara lengkap, maka murid akan mendapatkan Certificate of Completion sebagai award untuk murid yang sudah belajar menggunakan Atlaz. Dengan Atlaz, murid dapat meningkatkan higher order thinking skills, real world skills, dan karakter building. Buku kami tersedia dari grade 1 sampai grade 13. Dengan Atlaz, belajar bahasa Inggris bisa dilakukan oleh semua kalangan, dimanapun dan kapanpun. Atlaz, the next step to world-class education.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang semuanya. Welcome to our webinar, Competency-Based Assessment, Our National Examination Still Needed. I am Wafa Falanisa. I will be the moderator for today's webinar. Izin mengingatkan kembali kepada Bapak Ibu, boleh untuk mengganti namanya menjadi nama underscore asalnya. Jadi seperti Wafa underscore Jakarta. Before we start, here are two quick reminders. The first one is to receive your 4GPE certificate. Please make sure to fill out the form that I will share at the end of the session on Zoom and YouTube. And the attendance list will be shared at the end of the session, and you will need to enter 2 keywords from our speakers. Our webinar today entitled Competency-Based Assessment, Our National Examination Still Needed. The discussion will be delivered by Mr. Kusen MPD, Ketua MGMP Bahasa Inggris SMA Provinsi Jawa Timur. Good afternoon, Mr. Kusen.
Good afternoon, Ms. Wafa.
How are you, sir?
I'm okay, great.
Are you ready for today's webinar, sir?
Sure.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Kusen. So the second one is Mr. Kevin Febryan, Chief Product Officer of Atlaz. Good afternoon, Mr. Kevin.
Good afternoon, Ms. Wafa.
Nice to see you, sir.
Nice to see you as well.
Are you ready, sir, for today's webinar?
Yes, but I think the weather is not supporting because like it's raining right now, but hopefully everybody still has their cup of coffee to keep you guys awake, right?
Yes, thank you so much, sir. Oh, Miss Hania have a coffee too. Hello, Miss. Good afternoon. Okay, maybe I will check our audience in here. There is Miss Ririn, Miss Sarah. Hello, Miss. Good afternoon. Okay, so I want to greet the teachers from YouTube. I would also to remind you to share this moment on the Instagram and tag Instagram at Hi Atlas, so that more teachers out there are inspired to continue the developing themselves. So during the presentation, tolong Bapak Ibu boleh bercengkrama lewat chat Zoom apabila ada yang ingin ditanyakan atau yang ingin dikomentarkan. Silahkan. Now, without any further ado, I would like to welcome to our first speaker for today's webinar, Mr. Kusen. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Miss Baba. Wait, okay, let me share the screen. Is it already visible?
Yes, sir.
All right. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Dear the Excellency everyone, all English teachers, the committee from Atlas, I am feeling very honored to be invited again for the second occasion by Atlas to have to be the speaker in this kinds of session. And again, thank you very much for Atlas for inviting me to have this session. This trust is such kind of an honor for me, and hoping that I can fulfill the demand and the honor to present things that might be necessary for all teachers in Indonesia. And Ms. Wava, Mr. Kevin, and everyone, let me begin to have the presentation. And our topic today is competency-based assessment. Our national examination still needed. I am Muhammad Kusen, the chairperson of MGMP Bahasa Inggris SMA Provinsi Jawa Timur. To begin this talk, I'd like to have the overview what we are going to discuss. The first one is right before we are talking about competency-based assessment. So
Permisi Bapak, maaf, mic-nya ke mute, sorry.
am I still sharing the screen?
Yes, sir.
All right, sorry. Sorry everyone, let me try to repeat again for what I have already spoken before. So our topic today is competency-based assessment. Our national examination still necessary. Everyone, talking about competency-based assessment, so we cannot avoid of mentioning right before that one about competency-based learning or competency-based education. And in this way, I'm going to talk about the key concept, features, and implementation. Following that, I'm going to talk to you all about competency-based assessment, focusing on key principles and practical application. And in the end of that, we are going to talk about whether or not national examination is still needed. So let me begin to talk about competency-based learning at first. Everyone, talking about competency-based learning or competency-based education. So we are basically talking about educational approach. And this approach is placing the students, and in that way, they are going to be measured based on the demonstration of mastery of specific competencies. Let me specify, especially dealing with the different color of my presentation, demonstration of mastery of specific competencies. Here is going to be the main focus of competency-based learning. The concept basically emphasizes the importance of aligning education with student-centered goal, promoting equity. What is equity in this sense? Equity in this sense, or equity in education here refers to ensuring that every student has the access to resources, opportunity, and support they need to success based on their individual circumstances and preparing learners for real-world application. What we basically specify our discussion on competency-based learning is on demonstration of mastery of specific competencies, and the features relating to that will be student-centered goals and promoting equity, as well as preparing learners for real-world application. Let me move on. And the key concept for competency-based learning or competency-based education, number one is clear learning goals. In competency-based learning, so the learning goal should be very clear that learning is broken down into explicit and measurable competencies. The goals are communicated transparently to the students. Second of all, mastery before progression. What we mean here, right before the student move further into another mastery, so the student should begin or be the student must have the certain mastery toward the material that are taught to them at first. Prior to moving on, so they must be sure that they have already mastered with that kind of material. The third one is on personalized learning. The key concept of our competency-based learning is that every individual is respected. Students have their own need, interest, and pacing. Right here, basically, we also have that kind of discussion quite clear in differentiated learning in Curriculum Merdeka, actually. And the last one is focus on transferable skills. In this way, the what is it the task or the compulsory for the teachers is making sure that what they need to develop for the student is that the skill that can be transferred into the students. Okay, let's move on. Now we go to the features of competency-based education. First of all is student-centered approach. I don't really need to explain any further about these kinds of things. That competency-based education is on that competency-based education should be all student-centered approach. This approach will be focused on how the student perform better in any kinds of situational context during their learning. Then again, the second feature is on proficiency skills. Everyone right here, in the idea of proficiency skills, the students will be awarded such kind of mastery, such as emerging, approaching, or provision, or advanced. Basically, this also happens in the context of Curriculum Merdeka already. So I think that it has been clear for us anyhow. Then we go to features of flexible pacing. Remember everyone, students in their nature, they have their own speed of how they can learn anything. In this way, competency-based education provides the situation that the student can learn based on their flexibility of how they have to learn. Students move at their own pace. When they need to be longer, so they can decide that they can study longer based on their situation, or even when the student can accelerate the possibility of their learning, so that they can even do the faster learning process anyhow. Then we go ahead, use formative assessment. In possible situation, in most occasion of competency-based education, so assessment will take place on formative, meaning that during the process of learning, the assessment basically mostly will take place. So in competency-based education, students are observed and evaluated during overall processes. The next one is on real-world application. CBE or competency-based education or competency-based learning or CBL basically emphasizes the tasks that mirror real-world challenges, meaning that what we have to bring on into classroom practices must reflect the situation that happens exactly in the real-world situation. So this way, the degree of authenticity is higher. Okay, then I already mentioned in the beginning, equity and access. make sure that in competency-based education, every student, regardless their background, they receive the support they need to achieve the mastery. Whether they are coming from low economical background, whether they are going from the high respect family, so they must have the real support for that. And in this way, this happens into equity concept of the features from competency-based education. Okay, everyone, now how is basically the way to implement competency-based education in English teaching? All right, so right here, we have, say, now we are teaching listening, speaking, reading, and writing, are essential attitudes. In this way that we need to identify what competency we are going to specify on. And also we need to define or we need to decide what skills we are going to put that. Whether, like, for example, in the previous one, we have emerging, then provision, then advanced, or and so forth. So we need to have these kinds of thing at first. And if we are trying to specify on listening, speaking, or reading, or writing, so we need to decide what sort of competency we are going to set up into our students' mastery. Then, oh sorry, number 2. How is that the way to implement? The second one is design tailored learning activities. The possibility of the learning activities will also be influenced by how well we understand the student's need. Every individual of our students should also be, should be facilitated based on their own need and their own pace. So right here, we need to decide based on the philosophy of differentiated learning. So try to provide any activities that suit toward the student's need as well. Incorporate method like project-based learning or inquiry-based learning, or I think that everyone has already been familiar with this. So make sure that everyone right here should try to design based on the nature of the language teaching itself. For example, if we think that we are teaching procedure text and the good method we are going to implement is on project-based learning, so why not? So just try to pick up on this. If you think that we are going to identify such kind of big issue relating to analytical exposition or orthotic exposition, might be that we are better to prepare using query-based or problem-based learning. Let me move on. The third one, we are going to use continuous assessment. I already mentioned the previous that one of the features of competency-based education is on formative assessment. Right here, teachers may also address such kind of familiar processes of teaching or interaction with the students. In that way, the student can have the very comfortable situation during classroom processes. So assessment takes place during the teaching itself, and assessment is basically ongoing. So right here, there is a process of, say, here mentioned quizzes, reviews, and also feedback, for example. And again, we have the way to implement. The next one is provide personalized support. I believe that everyone during your class teaching, it happens to you that you encounter with the students with the specific need, or probably you encounter with the student that needs your special attention. Probably their grammar is not really good, so you need to come closer to him or to her. So these kinds of personalized support is also basically very important to implement competency-based education. Next, build a growth-oriented environment. To do this, everyone, you need to create a learning a step-by-step journey. In that way, you may begin from something real, something concrete in the beginning, and then going beyond into something abstract, or going from something easy to more difficult concept, rather than that you just try to mix up your teaching. So growth oriented environment, making sure that everything coming in such kind of stairs, making the good guidance for your students. Okay, competency-based assessment. Now we are going to talk about competency-based assessment. First, we have focus on proficiency skills. Second, multiple opportunities for mastery. Alignment with learning goals. Formative assessment as key tools. Individualized and flexible assessment method. And then feedback-driven learning. Let me try to unpack one by one what they mean as this. All right. I already mentioned in the beginning that we talk about skills right here. All right. So we go to directly number 3. Levels typically include emerging, approaching, proficiency, then proficient, then advanced. This is not a must, everyone. So if you think that you need to set up your own levels, so feel free to set up your own levels. Don't think that this is going to be compulsory for you, that the levels should be emerging, then approaching proficiency, then proficient, then advanced. If you think that you need to levels up into 3, so that is on your own sake, that will be okay for you to decide. So the scale is going to be very important in competency-based assessment. So by having these kinds of levels, so that will be easier for you to detect, or that will be easier for you to classify where to which position your student will be. Then the second of all, the multiple opportunities for mastery. Everyone, there will be many possibilities in conducting the assessment based on competency-based assessment. That is that students are assessed multiple times using various format until they demonstrate mastery. So if you think that you need to provide different ways of assessment, so feel free to implement, because this is the philosophy of competency-based assessment. And this reduces high stake of a single assessment and support growth over time. So if you have the variety, or if you have the various method of assessment, so if you can conduct and you can implement that, so you have a different resources, or you have different resources to detect the your students mastery to what you are teaching. Okay. This is also very important aspect when we talk about competency-based assessment, that is alignment with the learning goals. Right in the beginning of implementing competency-based education, that you need to set up the goals. So right here, when you are teaching, especially everyone, I believe that must come in the very beginning, that in any kind of assessment, that you need to put this into, that your assessment should be aligned with the learning goals. That one is, I think that one is a must to do for every teacher. That assessment are directly tied to the competency students are expected to master. Then going ahead, formative assessment as key tools. To be short and to be easy to implement. In the way of formative assessment happens when students even are not aware that they are being assessed. Such kind of simple question to address to your student might also give you impression that basically you have already got the data of your students. So in this way, in any matter of you are teaching, in any possible situation you are teaching, then you are trying to address quiz, you are trying to address, okay, what do you think for your student, for your friend respond to this kinds of question by having peer review, and then you are trying to observe that. This also type of the feature of formative assessment. Or in the end of your class, probably that you are going to try to ask your student to make their reflective feedback during their class processes. This is also formative assessment. So basically, you have got broader you have got broad opportunities for you to detect when your students basically can perform their natural talent, their natural mastery to what you are teaching. All right, going ahead, individualized and flexible assessment method. Everyone, I already mentioned in my previous slide that the implementation of competency-based learning or competency-based education in the context of the assessment, that students should be even given the occasion of individualized treatment. So if you think that you need to provide such kind of personal assistant with your students, I think that will be okay. So until finally the student can master toward the material you are teaching. Okay, in competency-based assessment, feedback-driven learning, meaning that feedback is specific, actionable, and timely, focusing on focusing on how student can improve. Let me tell you how this will happen in a real context. Once that you get closer to your students, right after your students say in speaking class, then you come closer to the student after he or she performed his or her speaking. Then you come closer to him and okay, your speaking is quite good, but then you need to revise, especially dealing with the structure. Then when you come closer to what every individual, then or you provide the feedback individually, so that one is called by specific and actionable, meaning that your feedback is basically addressed to what your feedback is basically addressed to what the weaknesses or thing that you want to develop any further. So I think that will be good idea to implement this. All right, now we go to different perspective of competency-based assessment. Right before we are reviewing from Marzano, now we go to Sorensen. That number one is move away from standardized testing. Number two, authentic or real world assessment. Number three, personalized assessment pathways. Number four, mastery as the goal. Number five, assessment as a growth tool. Number six, collaborative and reflective practices. Then number seven, balance assessment practices. And the last one is use of technology and data. So let's go to number one for these key features. Uh, Ms. Wafa, how much longer do I still have? 8 minutes?
You can go with 10 minutes, sir.
All right, okay. Everyone, move away from standardized testing. Imagine everyone when you implement the task that is standardized, going back again to the time once that you face the situation that the test is standardized, and you face the papers or you face the supervisor, then that kind of thing is quite I think quite stressing in that way. So competency based assessment trying to drag away that kind of standardized testing. So rather than talking about standardized testing, competency based assessment will go more on formative assessment rather than standardized. And assessment in competency-based assessment measure deeper understanding and application of knowledge. So you may even come into deepening situation. One, your student, for example, you go to the what is it? I have to say upper achiever. For example, you go to student with upper achiever, so you may even still provide that kind of learning in that way, guiding them into mastery that beyond the reach so far. So for example, they have already come to a proficient, but you believe that your student can even reach into advanced level. So you go to further assistant, like before I'm mentioning about personalized learning. So you may assist the person until they finally get the advanced level. Let me move further. The second one, authentic, real world assessment. We probably teachers encounter the situation that teaching the classroom with the existing textbook. We are teachers teaching in the classroom with availability of the material provided with the publisher, for example. In the fact of that, we have to remember that one of the issue, like here in the idea of competency-based assessment, is the term authentic. Authentic in this way refers to any kinds of material that is designed not for the educational purposes. In that way, probably that you need to come the situation once that you come to the classroom bringing on something as authentic as possible. For example, you come to the classroom bringing on the Jakarta Post text, or probably you are teaching listening, but then you are going into real practices of how the language is basically spoken in a real context. So that one is authentic rather than isolated. So remember, when we implement competency-based assessment, so we bring on something authentic into our classroom practices. Personalized assessment pathways, students are assessed based on their individual learning goals and pace. Probably it is going to be a hard part for us to discuss further. Once that we are trying or we are teaching 36 students in a classroom, and in that way they have got 36 different learning goals. Imagine, is that going to be easy or is that going to be difficult? I believe that one is going to be difficult. Somehow that one will be implemented in competency-based assessment. In the fact of that, if you think that later on you want to implement this, so you may come back again to identifying learning goals and skills. Remember again, so when you have the learning goals, you provide the learning goals, then by providing the learning goals, then you break them down, then try to offer them to the students. And in the beginning, if they got such kind of response, probably later the student would like to propose based on the learning goals that have been provided to them. So by having that kind of situation, probably that it can minimize the possibility that you are going to encounter the situation, or you are going to you are going to deal with 36 different learning goals from 36 different students. So that way, so your skills and your learning goals in the beginning will be offered, and then we are trying to adjust that one in hoping that later on there will be possibility for you to minimize. Okay, going ahead. Mastery of the goal. Mastery as the goal. So all right, the mastery based on the skills and the mastery based on the learning goals later on will be as the key features of competency-based assessment. Okay, if you think that, for example, we are talking about main idea, we are talking about detailed information, we are talking about inference in listening section, for example. So in that way, because that one becoming the goal, so that kind of mastery become the goal as well. So the goal, the mastery will be as the important aspect of competency-based assessment. All right, let me go again. Assessment as a growth tool. Right before this, I'm already mentioning step-by-step procedural one, coming from the easy one to more difficult until the most difficult part, and then coming from concrete and then going to abstract one rather than upside down situation. Students are encouraged to view assessment as an opportunity to learn and improve. So I'm thinking that situation of this will happen when you know exactly your student, you know exactly the progress of your students. Once your student encounter the problem on grammar, then later on you facilitate the grammar. Once your student encounter with the vocabulary, then you are trying to facilitate them with the vocabulary. But remember that even though that you are dealing with so many different aspects, still that you need to go on the track what is actually your focus. Whether you are teaching reading, whether you are teaching speaking, whether you are teaching listening, or whether you are teaching writing. But again, the goal should be as the mastery. Okay, collaborative and reflective practices. Competency-based assessment provide the situation of collaboration for the students, like peer reviews, like self-assessment or reflection. This happens in class processes. And check again how often you are trying to ask your student to have the self-assessment, and check again in possible situation once that you are teaching, once that you are asking the students to have peer review, once possibly happen in writing classes probably. Check again how many or how often you are trying to ask your student to make any reflection, in what way you are conducting the reflection itself. Okay, going ahead. Balance assessment practices. This is going to be the lead that make us think later on whether or not national examination are still the need for that. A balance between formative and summative. Later we are going to discuss this any further. Formative assessment drive day-to-day instruction, while summative assessment validate overall mastery. The term of summative probably in our context easier to say, probably semester process. That one is summative, while formative one, once you are teaching, you are also doing the assessment. Use technology of data based on Sorensen. This one is important. The digital tool can provide immediate feedback, track progress, and support personalization pathways. Probably for this, if you are not implementing the use of technology, probably you may skip. But if you think that it's still necessary, so it's good for you to implement, like using, okay, file sharing, using Google Doc, using Canva, using any kind of different software or different application, then you may provide directly immediate feedback. That will be good as well. Okay, now we are going to have a direct comparison between Marzano and Sorensen, talking about what is it, competency-based assessment. Check the focus, proficiency skills, and mastery-based progression. Right here, shift from standardized test to personalized authentic assessment. Okay, so which are going to be as our stand later. Check role of assessment, a growth tool. Right here continues, so more or less the same still. Clear rubric, formative assessment, flexible method. Right here, authentic, real world task aligned with individual learning goals. Probably a bit different, but we have formative and we have completion of authentic. Emphasizes student ownership through reflection. Student ownership right here, also facilitating individual learning goals. Right here, collaborative self-assessment and peer reviews. That's good. Then not a central focus, but supportive for tracking progress, but technology use for Sorensen, that one we advocated. Okay, let me speed up. Are national examination still needed? UN is summative, or national examination is summative, standardized. Previous one, from Sorensen, we believe we are trying to move away from standardized. But whether or not national examination still needed, later on, based on our claim or based on this philosophy, we have to be wise anyhow. The key characteristics of national examination: number one, standardized, summative, and fixed schedule. Meanwhile, that in competency-based assessment, we are encouraged not to be in fixed schedule, but rather than in flexible pace. Somehow. Okay, let's check. In CBA, the purpose to assess, improve student mastery specific competencies, to evaluate student achievement of national curriculum standard. comprehensive. We also have listening, speaking, reading, writing. Check flexibility, flexible timing, but here fixed timing. Shouldn't assess when ready, but here is fixed one. Real world tasks, but here primary structured tasks, though speaking and listening can include more authentic scenarios. Structured, but here real world tasks. In CBA or competence-based assessment should bring on real world tasks. The feedback is ongoing, but later, if I'm not mistaken, in my occasion, what is it? In my situation, when UN is basically implemented, we rather have the feedback. Probably for those who have the access, they can have the feedback. But if not, so probably we are not going to have the feedback for the every single individual of the students. Next, inclusivity. Request tailored approaches, challenging for under-resourced schools, but here standardized for all students. So this one is quite different. Testing method, multiple method. So you may do oral, written, or project-based, but here mostly on written or oral if it is possible. But mostly UN is written. Then going ahead, focus on skill, emphasizes higher order thinking, real world application, skill mastery, emphasizes proficiency listening, speaking, but may lack deep context or application. So because we have real world application. Reliability, highly reliable when implemented with proper resources and consistency. Okay, check. When implemented with proper resources and consistency. So when it is implemented with with lack of resources and consistency, so the reliability probably will not happen anyhow. Formative versus summative, continuous assessment, meanwhile that UN is summative. Okay. UN is still necessary for me. In what way that one is necessary? Given that UN or national examination include all four skills, its role as national assessment tool is still necessary for answering uniform evaluation of English competencies. Because right now probably that we don't have any kinds of evaluation for the uniformity of our students. That one probably we need to have external measures for our students to compare between what we have already teach, what we have already taught, and what we have already assessed, and with external measure from UN anyhow, providing data for national education and policy and quality improvement. And because I'm mentioning here with refinement, let's check what way or which one that we need to be included. Increasing tax authenticity. Probably in UN later on, if say that our minister would like to bring back again the national examination to increase the authenticity. Number one is incorporating formative feedback. So we propose that later on the Ministry of Education will also provide the feedback for the achievement of the institution. Then we can have we can have the analysis of what what our student has already achieved. Addressing equity issues, invest in teacher training. By having these kinds of thing, once I was also invited by the Ministry of Education because my student perform low on national examination. Then because of that, there should be also a training for the teachers. But equity in this way should also go to underprivileged areas, meaning that the training should go all out to every institution to make sure that the UN later on will also give the objective portrait of our students. The becoming the last indication is balancing high stake nature, reduce reliance on UN as the sole indicator of success. Meaning like this. Once we also have this kind of situation actually, but when UN determine the success, the only determination of the success, So I think that one should be brought into the balance that, okay, there is UN, but make sure that UN not only as a matter to decide the success of the students, but more or less complementing with more formative or ongoing assessment. That's all, Miss Wafa. Thank you for that kind of things. Probably that's all that I can present. I return back again to you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you so much, Mr. Kusen, for your presentation. Now, before we move on to our next session, izin mengingatkan lagi kepada Bapak dan Ibu untuk mengganti nama di Zoom-nya menjadi nama underscore domisili. Contohnya adalah Wafa_Jakarta. Okay, let's we move on to our next session. We are now ready to have our Q&A. Untuk Bapak dan Ibu yang ingin bertanya kepada Mr. Kusen, boleh untuk raise hand dan lalu open mikrofonnya, atau boleh langsung type di kolom chat Zoom. Silahkan Bapak Ibu. Mungkin sambil menunggu, aku memiliki beberapa, enggak sih, sebenarnya aku memiliki satu pertanyaan Bapak terkait competency-based assessment. Oke, mungkin ada Mr. Wahid, boleh Mr. Wahid duluan. Silakan Mr. Wahid.
Okay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon,
Miss
Mr.
Wafa,
Wahid.
and good afternoon, Mr. Kusen.
Okay.
So I wonder that I can watch your presentation from the beginning, but in the middle of your presentation, so I think you are so delightful presenter, sir. But I have one or two questions, Mr. Kusen. The first is about the competency of our student, because we knows that in my city, in my regency, some of my students at my class has so many differences level of their competency in English speaking class, in mastering vocabulary. So in your method or in your competency-based assessment, should so we have to make the student have same competency to make sure our goal will be what we say will be achieved more, and the result will be better than before. So because it I think it's so difficult to make sure the student have same competency in speaking English. Okay, that's all about my question. Maybe once only, maybe, sir.
Okay.
You
Should
got
I
it, sir?
directly answer that one, Ms. Wafa?
Boleh,
Okay,
Ustaz.
thank you, Mr. Wahid, for the very brilliant questions. Mr. Wahid, one of the philosophy of competency-based education, basically, we are talking about that. Right before we are talking about what is the competency-based assessment. So we need to understand deeper about how is basically a way to implement competency-based education or competency-based learning. You mentioned that, all right, I already informed you, or I already presented to you actually that, all right, in a class we have got 36 students. In a class, if we provide this all, so we are going to have a different 36 different learning goals. Is that going to be very complicated? Yes, surely that one is really complicated. But for us as a teacher, so we need to provide the assistance, the guidance in what way later that we need to make sure that our student can achieve the goal. Okay, let us try to specify our discussion of talking about the certain aspect of the language or language skill we are going to deal with. For example, now we are teaching the students about listening skill. And in that way, in the listening skill, we are going to make sure that the learning goals on listening skill will be their mastery toward detailed information and their mastery toward message, for example. So when you have already set up these kinds of things, so make sure that the student understand that this is basically the goal of our learning in listening class. When the student has already known this one, so your treatment should be addressed toward these goals. I believe I believe that the treatment that addressed with these kinds of goal, different student will have a different acceptance. In that way, later on, the way that you can conduct with these kinds of thing, for example, because you know exactly the detail one and the message, which one is more complicated for the student. So you have already got the qualitative analysis that basically the message is more difficult rather than detailed information. So you treat the student first on detailed information. So your teaching will be addressed toward detailed information. So right here, so you may measure that among 36 students, 32 students have already passed. So their mastery has already come on that kind of level. So then you are successful. So meaning that you have got the standard of what you have already achieved for your students. But later on, the remaining students are in the number of 6, for example. So from these 6 students, so you need to give personal approach. You need to come closer to them. You need to give them more guidance. If you think that detailed information in listening class should be still very difficult, so you may assist them. You may even give them the audio that you are using in your listening class. So by having that kind of situation, so you go further into the message in listening class. So I think by having this kinds of process, if you know the philosophy of how competency-based learning, so you know how you can implement competency-based assessment. That one, Miss Baba. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Kusen. Maybe Mr. Wahid have another question. When I teach listening, some of my students still confusing because they didn't know the meaning of the dialogue. But if I take the easier dialogue, the smarter students always asking me to upgrade the material level. So what I have to do first?
All right. In the situation once we implement Curriculum Merdeka, I believe that all teachers have already experienced with what is so-called as diagnostic assessment. So by having the benefit of this diagnostic assessment, so basically you have already got at least I may say raw data of your students. If you have already got the raw data of your students, so basically in your head as the teacher, you basically have already got something in mind that among 36 of the students, among 36 of my students, I already have 24 good students and the remaining one is below achiever, for example. So knowing these kinds of things, basically in the preparation of the material, so you may adjust balance at first, balance material for upper achiever and below achiever. So if you have already got that kind of balance, so later on, so you may measure or you may do the assessment process during your classes processes. So make sure everyone, so during your class processes, you know exactly that one is below achiever and that one is truly high achiever. So if you have already observed that kind of situation, later on, motivate the one becoming high achiever to be the one becoming the guide for the low achiever. So if you can do that kind of process, so high achiever will be or will feel honored, will feel awarded because of that you give them a trust to guide their friends. So that thing probably important way how we can manage our classroom. That one, Miss Bob.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kusen. So, Mr. Wahid, I hope it answer your question. Maybe next question from Mr. Emmanuel Bolibura. Excuse me, Mr. Kusen, what do you think of current issue that the new education ministry wants to apply again the national examination or UN?
Well, Miss Baba, thank you for questioning. I already put into my slide that basically we, especially if I'm not saying all teachers, senior teachers, I may say, senior teachers have already experienced the situation when UN basically was implemented long before Curriculum Merdeka, until finally that one the what is it UN has already been dropped until now, and we don't have any UN anymore. What I'm thinking about this, basically, I already put into my last slide that basically how we view UN itself will be also very important for us to design our classroom practices. What I mean here, I already mentioned that UN becoming the important aspect of the uniformity of the standardized test. In that way, it becomes the external measure. I repeat it again, that UN becoming external measure. Remember, when you only implement the measures that is only based on your own school, can you even guarantee that your teaching has been successful without any kinds of external measures? So what I'm thinking here, external measures are still very important. In the fact of that, our students are not quite lucky to continue their study into university, one of which external measures can be taken. So because our student, for example, are progressing into university, meaning there is a big possibility that we can know the result of our teaching based on those who progress to university. Unluckily, that our students are not all in that lucky, because not all students are progressing into university. That's why I say that external measures are still very important to be one part of sources for what is it, sources of checking the success of our education. That one, Miss Baba. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Kusen. Okay, to Mr. Emmanuel, maybe it will answer your question. Maybe Bapak Ibu, is there any another question? Hmm, can I ask Mr. Kevin about Mr. Emmanuel question, sir?
Sure thing. Maybe I'll answer after my session later.
Okay, sir. Okay, so maybe Mr. Kusen sudah selesai bagian Q&A-nya. Saya ingin meminta sedikit tentang keywords untuk hari ini.
Okay, keyword hari ini, Miss Wawa. The keyword for today's session, for my session, is feedback-driven learning. Feedback-driven learning.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. So for the first keyword is feedback-driven
Driven
learning.
learning. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for your session, Mr. Kusen.
Okay.
I really happy to hear your presentation. Thank you so much again. So after this, I will move on to our next session. Before we proceed, I would like to remind you all to follow our Instagram at hi.atlas, and you can share your story and tag hi.atlas. Okay, before we move on, let's watch this video first. Okay, let's we move on to our next session. Hello, Mr. Kevin.
Hello.
Okay, are you ready, sir, for today's webinar?
Yes, I'm ready, but I think we have to ask everybody else though. Are they ready for another session? Okay, I think all right. So I get some thumbs up. Very nice. So Miss Wafa, can I just start right now? Okay.
Yes,
All
sir,
right.
the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. All right. Sorry, I had to like manage my spotlight and everything. And I'm so sorry because my camera is pretty dark today because it's dark outside. I believe it's dark in your places as well. Is it dark in Jawa Timur, Mr. Kusen?
Yeah, it just ended for the raining, and now it's
Same.
fresh.
Okay. All right, so that's pretty even, right? In
Yeah.
Indonesia right now, I think. Okay. Wow. Thank you so much. All right. So everybody, so thank you for staying in tune with us and thank you for still being there. So my name is Mr. Kevin. You can call me Kevin, Mr. Kevin. It's up to you. And I'm currently the Chief Product Officer at Atlaz. And today, what I will be sharing is basically, well, what Mr. Kusen has already explained to all of you, but more into the practical approach, how we can actually implement it in class, what can we do about it, and how we can see it in Atlaz products as well, how we have designed everything in certain ways so you can use it in a more make sense way, right? Because we have talked about all kinds of assessments there were and what we can do in class and so on. So now how can we actually see it in action? So that will be my focus. All right, so please allow me to share my screen. So here I've mentioned. So the topic will be more assessments in English language learning. Because I think like if we're talking about assessments in general, there'll be so many, right? And especially if we're talking about like different subjects, there will be like different ways of assessing as well. And I think Mr. Kusen has really nicely laid out like everything about how we should be approaching assessments. Because English is a different type of subject than any other subjects there are, right? Because we're talking about language learning. We're not talking about something that is easily measurable just by numbers or by quantifying things, putting percentages. It's not that easy because somebody might be scoring 100% on their TOEFL score or maybe like a perfect IELTS writing or even listening, but maybe their speaking is not there at all. So how come that is a problem, right? So we have to start seeing how we are assessing our students. That's the reason why we're bringing today's webinar to you. It's to reflect on our ways of assessing. And then Mr. Kusen has also mentioned about like national examinations, right? So even though like we still probably needed some external resources as well to assess how we're doing, whether we are actually successful in our teaching as well. But there has to be some sort of alignment to like each of our goal. So I think that's a really nice approach to it. Okay, so well, I have mentioned about a little bit about myself. For those of you who don't know me yet, so I have graduated from the University of Southern California with a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration. And here are some experiences about myself as well. I have been the Director of Studies at English First, have been teaching English since 2018, and I've been in charge of developing teachers and academic excellence, and also teaching students from the age of 3 years old all the way to adults. So it doesn't really matter if you're teaching grade 1, grade 2, grade 7, grade 12, or even if you're teaching adults, basically our topics will still be applicable for you if you're attending our webinars. Okay, a little bit about Atlaz itself. This is basically, if you don't know who Atlaz is, yes, we are an English book publisher, but we don't only just provide book, but we actually provide the whole ecosystem, basically. So we want to provide the best materials there are, but not just for the students so they can learn at their best, but also for the teachers. So basically, we want to provide resources that teachers can find easy to use. So things that will help you in your administrative tasks, because we believe that teachers have already a lot of things to do. You have a lot of things on your plate. So when being asked about like improving teaching quality, then it's not a whole problem. So with Atlaz, what we believe in is that we want to help you take care of all these minor things that you have to take care of so you can really focus on your teaching quality, hence reaching the learning goals in the future. Okay, so for my part, so actually it won't be too long, but I'll just be going over these 5 things. So first, we'll go over like competency-based assessments, since that's the big main theme for today's webinar. Just a little bit, I think it's similar to what Mr. Kusen has already mentioned. And then about like why it matters a lot in English language learning, because we will see how it actually is, I think, already applied in so many different other settings, but why not in English? And then aligning assessments with learning objectives, pros and cons, and what to anticipate. And the last one, putting things in action. Okay, so a little bit, just a refresher again about the competency-based assessments. So basically, what they are, I think I tried to make it as simple as possible. So if, let's say, we are still confused about, let's say, the difference between formative assessment, summative assessment, and competency, there are so many different types of assessments there are. Just to make it easier, I would like to just simplify it in this words. So these are the assessments that are based on mastering individual skills. So I would highlight the word individual here. So it's not about the case that we are approaching all mastery levels at once. It's not about like saying like, oh, that student is definitely a C1 level right now. That's not a competency-based exam. That's basically just stating the proficiency, right? But about competency, it's basically on specific skills of what that student needs to be able to do. So the second one, it's supposed to be a real world based, preparing students for the world they are going to enter. So building essential skills needed to succeed beyond school. And the third one, I think, is what's really interesting is that it's being used a lot in terms of teachers becoming the mentors and students become the apprentices. So I would like us to just imagine ourselves. Let's say we just graduate from school. We put ourselves in the student's shoes, right? We just graduate from maybe universities or maybe we don't go to universities, we just go straight to work, but then we get an internship and then we're being taught. So we are an apprentice, right? So basically we are being taught how to do certain things. Then let's say when we're doing that thing, there will be certain keystones. I would say that our assessors will have to say, oh, you are ready to do this. You're ready to do that. So imagine ourselves, maybe let's take any profession there is. Maybe let's imagine something as simple as a factory worker, right? A factory worker who needs to work in a factory needs to be able to operate these really huge machines in their factory. So obviously, we don't just put an employee there and ask them like, okay, just press this button and then let the machine do their own thing. So we have to teach the standard of procedure first, the SOP, right? So how to run it in the first time, then how to be sure that it works well, and the safety measures, all those things. Then before we allow that employee to be able to work by themselves, we need to assess first, are they ready to do it by themselves? So we are there to guide, to accompany this employee, right? Then after we deem that they are ready, then they can do it themselves. That basically is how it works. And that's how a competency-based assessment should work as well. But then we're taking it in a school setting, in an educational setting, so we will see how it works. So I think sometimes if we're still confused what they are, it's also important to know what they are not. So at least like you understand that, okay, so there are certain things that makes competency-based examinations different than any types of exams or assessments there are. So the first one, it's not time-bound. So I think that's another thing that we need to be sure of. So that's why we don't see a lot of it, because especially in our education setting in Indonesia, everything is time bound, right? There's a deadline. We need to finish by a certain date. Students need to achieve certain things. Teachers need to finish certain aims and such for the reports and so on, right? But then this is not what it is, right? Because it's not about making sure that we're reaching that within a certain amount of time, but it's about making sure that they're reaching that mastery level. Then the second one is not limited to written tests. Actually, a lot of them are actually not written at all. So like Mr. Kusen has mentioned earlier as well, right? Difference between competency and also national examinations. In national examinations, everything can be measurable in written form, like listening, reading, written, but the competency is almost the complete opposite. If anything, in English, it will be more towards the functional use of it. So let's say speaking-wise, how do we measure speaking? Can we put speaking into writing? Maybe in a sense if we put it in the transcript, but will that be applicable towards what we're assessing them for? Probably not, right? Because when we're talking about speaking, then it's about whether students are able to communicate using words, grammar, structures, and so on. And the third one, It's not comparative between one student to another. So that's why it relates back to Mr. Kusen's answer to, I think, Mr. Wahyu earlier, right? So when we are assessing 36 students, then everybody has a different learning goal. Then do we want, let's say, all of them to achieve like the same goal? Probably not. And that's the challenge of if we want to implement this in our teaching, that it's not applicable in that sense. We cannot actually compare one student to the other based on our result of the competency-based assessment itself. Okay, so now let's talk specifically about English learning itself. If we want to somehow implement it, if we want to bring it into our classroom. So first thing that we need to understand, the assessments are not just about taking tests. So actually, I just had this recent talk today with one of the teachers that I know. Basically, that when she went to this school, that the school still implements in a way of teaching that is very traditional. So for example, let's say we need to teach students how to use conditionals, for example, right? So then the first slide that pops in is conditional sentence. The theory is such and such and such, right? So when we're doing it that way, yes, maybe that's, I would say, more grammar translation type of method of teaching, right? But if we're taking that to the extreme level, right? That means we're just making sure that students understand the theory behind it, that they understand the concept of conditional sentence. But by the end of the lesson, are they able to form this conditional sentence? Maybe they're able to put them one by one, right? As if like they're writing it in a test. So that's why this is about taking tests. But if we're asking them, let's say the question, so what will you do today, right? If it rains, what will you do? Will they be able to use first conditional, for example, I will go home or I will wait until my mom picks me up, right? Will they be able to use conditional sentence if we give them the context? Probably not, right? So that's where I want to take you to reflect on yourself. If you're still teaching in that sense, right? If you're still teaching in that method, that you need to question yourself, is that really what you want the students to understand? Or is there more to it, what you wish the students to understand more? And that's why the competency-based assessment is not just about taking tests. So we need to get out of that zone of making sure that students get 100% on their test, or we're preparing them for just the tests. It's not about the tests, but it's about the skill, what you want them to achieve. The second one, scoring good grades is not equal to proficiency in using the language. So this is something I mentioned earlier today, right? So if, let's say, students, they score pretty well on your tests, on your exams, but you still face some students that are still struggling to even form basic communicative language when they are using English to speak. So that happens a lot. So for example, let's say they get 100%, yay, okay, so we know the student is really good in an English class. But then when the student somehow meets a native speaker out there, then they just like, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to say. Am I saying correctly? Then they lose the confidence and they seem like they don't know English at all. It happens a lot. And that is because we focus so much on the score. Well, this one is not. So at least what we need to understand as well, there's innovation of technologies such as AI that will significantly change the trend of the importance of grades. So if we're still focused on getting good grades, let's say students need to score 100% on their essay, or maybe at least like they need to achieve 90%. But now if we put everything on AI, students can access AI themselves, right? If we're asking to write articles, they can write articles easily, just write the prompt and it will pop up. But will that really show what they're capable of, right? Will that really show their English language skill, or will that just show how much they can actually use this feature, this new technology? That's something that we need to be aware of as well. And we need to be really mindful of when we're assigning types of projects or assignments or assessments in class, because what we are assessing, it really matters as well. Then the third one, language teachers might approach teaching language less effectively due to focusing on traditional examinations. So if we're focused on teaching what will be asked in the test later on, we might lose the essence. We might lose the essence of like why they need to learn the language in the first place. So let's say conditional, right? Why they need to learn conditional? Are they supposed to know conditionals just so they can form perfect conditional sentences? Or do we want them to naturally be able to pull it up out of their mind whenever they need to use it, Right. So we need to ask ourselves that question. So I think these are the really, really important things for all of us here, especially the English teachers here, that we need to go beyond what we traditionally know as the assessments themselves. Okay, so then we'll talk about aligning the assessments with your learning objectives. So in my previous webinars, we talk a lot about setting your goals, learning objectives, target aim, especially when you are designing your lesson plan for the first time, you need to have an aim. And that aim is not just for one book, one unit, or maybe for one type of program, but it needs to be for every single lesson you're teaching your students. Before you even step into the classroom, you need to put yourself in the mind of what is my aim today? What do I want students to achieve? And so that's the first step, right? Set your aim, go through your learning objectives, and focus on what you want students to master. Then second one, determine the success criteria. So this is related to the competency-based assessment. I think Mr. Kusen has also mentioned, let's say like whether the student is proficient or maybe good or still needs some work, whatever that is, you are the one who determines that success criteria. It's not somebody else. It's not the internet. You can get some inspiration from internet for sure, but at the end, it's about you as a teacher who knows your students best. So I still believe, I'm like a firm believer that teachers know their students the best, even more than the government, even more than any book publishers out there. You, the teachers, know your students well, and you know your students' needs. That's why you need to make that criteria. You need to make that rubric for your students, not anybody else. We can provide you with it, we can help you out with it, but then it's your job to actually tailor it towards what your students need. Then third one, set formative assessments to make sure students have fully mastered what you want them to learn. So the formative assessments are, I would say, a little bit more formal because there's the word form in it, right? Than the competency, because there has to be something that is in a form that students understand, oh, okay, there is some sort of things that I'm being assigned for. Maybe in competency, they don't feel like, oh, it's an exam. But in formative assessment, there is that sense, but it's not as much as summative. Well, summative is very formal, right? Formative is still, it's kind of there, but it's more semi-formal. But then students understand like they need to somehow show that they have understood some things that they have learned from you. And there's also that success passing, I would say, criteria for you to understand whether the students have fully comprehended the materials or not. Then the next step is to revisit and reassess your students as necessary. So it's not a one-time thing. So when you're teaching something, let's say, so I got this question a lot. For example, let's say grammar question. Let's say in grade 2, for example, in grade 2, we're still teaching students present tense, right? But then we're somehow tapping into past tense a little bit. Then the teachers who are teaching that, when they're focused so much on the grammar, they would be asking, are you sure that we want to teach students past tense? Are they even ready to learn about past tense? They don't even fully comprehend present tense yet, right? So then usually what my answer is, I would ask them first. So how many tenses do you think there are in English, right? So be like, oh, maybe there are 12, there's 16, there's maybe 24, right? It depends on whichever that teacher has learned previously. But then what my question is, do you think we will ever see that same tense being taught again in the previous lessons? Then maybe, yeah, sort of, yes, okay, sure. So then that gets them to think, right? That even learning one tense, let's say present tense, we learn present tense right now just maybe to talk about habit. Maybe just, I like shopping, I go to the mall, right? It's very basic thing. But later, when we're talking about present simple being taught maybe in grade 10 or grade 11, students are already quite advanced, right? They're quite proficient. So obviously, we're not teaching them present tense to just be talking about those basic things anymore, but we're talking about more complicated things. Can we use present tense to talk about the future? Sure, yes. But then people will be asking, but do we have future tense to do that? Future tense is supposed to be helping out, right? Or we can use am going to, be going to. That's also talk about the future. So then we start realizing, oh, okay, it's not just about one thing, right? To talk about the future, we can use future tense, we can use present continuous tense, or we can even use present tense. So then the teachers, what we need to do is to understand that we're not just teaching students formulas. We're not just teaching them these things so that they're able to learn it once and that's it. We want students to understand that whatever that form that they've previously learned, they will revisit it again in the future. They will use it for a different setting. So then when they want to convey the message, what they want to specifically say in their head will be formed correctly, grammatically, nicely, when they know how to use it well. So that is the importance and why it's not a one-time thing. So it doesn't mean like, okay, once students have fully mastered this one skill about this grammar, then that's it. My job is done for teaching them that. It's not that. That's not the case. That's why it's ongoing. There's Mr. Kusen also mentioned, right? Continuous assessment. It's not final assessment. It's not final exam. There has to be something that's building up to it. And that's just the way language works. It's not about tapping one thing, done, and learning a completely new thing, done. It's not that way. It's using what you learned previously to learn what you will learn next, and so on and so on. It keeps building. And that's why as teachers, we need to scaffold, right? It goes back to scaffolding. Then the last one, set summative assessments to measure students' ability in achieving different learning objectives. At the end, yes, we can use some external parties, or we can use our own internal examination. It doesn't really matter, but at least there has to be some sort of uniformity, right? To state that at the very bare minimum that students need to be able to do this and that. So that way we can assess our success as a teacher as well, and the students as well of their own learning. All right. So then when we talk about using this, let's say, competency-based assessment, obviously, if this is something we haven't used previously, we need to consider the pros and the cons. Or if we have used it, but we are not aware of it, I would like you to think about the pros and the cons. So I think the first one for the pro is very useful for practical real-world skills. So and to ensure students can use English as a form of communication. So then we go beyond just the test, right? So it's making sure that students are able to use English naturally as a form of communication, as a language, not as a subject they need to learn at school, but it's about something that they can actually use in real life. The second one, flexibility, right? Personalized and individualized pace can help students to achieve the best outcomes for themselves. So it's no longer about teacher-centered, but it's more student-centered, and it's more personalized as well, because every student will have a different competency. Then the next one, the pro is minimizing result affecting factors. So something that we need to be aware of as well, let's say when we're assigning students exams or when they have to do national examinations, there will be these factors such as anxiety, test-taking skills, dishonesty, cheating, right? So there are so many different factors that can alter the result of the test itself. It does not portray who the students really are. So that's why competency-based actually mitigates all of that, because then competency-based assessment shows you who the students really are, what they're really capable of doing, because you're really assessing them on their individual level and on their individual skill as well. It's that specific. So those are the pros. But we need to talk about the cons as well. So the first one is it has very narrow focus. So it might limit students' creativity, problem solving, or interpersonal skills. Because if, let's say, we want to assess students on just one specific skill, but that student understands that, okay, so this is my success criteria. Maybe Ms. Wafa wants me to be able to do such and such in my class. So then my focus is basically on attaining that, right? Being able to do that. But when I'm focusing so much on that, I might not be focusing on the other things that I should be focusing as well. So I might be neglecting some of the other things. So some of that we can anticipate. So when I'm talking about cons, I like to anticipate as well. When you're assigning that success criteria, also make sure that students are aware of any other things that they need to be aware of. So a very practical example, for example, let's say writing. Maybe we're assigning students writing assessment. They need to write an essay. Maybe it's just one paragraph. Okay, doesn't have to be long, right? So we are assessing students of what we have taught them in class. And in this sense, maybe we talk about writing about main ideas, making sure that the first sentence has a main idea. Okay, perfect. So the students, they want to make sure, okay, I want to pass this competency, right? So I want to make sure that I'm writing it down correctly, as close as possible as what my teacher wants me to know, to be able to do. So then the students successfully done it, right? But on the way, maybe they don't check their grammar as much. So what they are neglecting is their grammatical accuracy, what they have learned previously. Very simple things. For example, maybe they write down, for example, the main idea is talking about hobby, right? So my favorite hobbies are such and such. But then they want to talk about, I want to talk about my friends. She like going to the mall, right? But my other friend, he don't like eating, right? So they make this basic grammatical mistakes because they're neglecting that. And that's something that we need to be aware of as well. As teachers, that's why we need to also build our instinct on error correction. So when we are having this competency-based assessment, we need to understand when we need to correct, when we are maybe not having to correct as well. But one thing to be sure of when you're using competency-based assessment is not to neglect all the other things that are also essential. The second one, it can be very time consuming, right? So because we have maybe 36 students, if we have to assess all of them like one by one, that will be too long. Or even if we have to differentiate in class, we have to put them in different groups, that will also take some time, right? But that's the challenge. So it will be harder to set any sort of deadlines. So that's why my suggestion, same like Mr. Kusen earlier, is to do a diagnostic assessment first. So that's why at the very beginning, you understand what pace the students have. And that diagnostic assessment is not just to diagnose students' ability in terms of their proficiency, but also their learning styles and interests as well. So that way you understand your students pretty well. And I'm suggesting when you're doing that, also write it down in the form of a table. So back then when I was still the director of study at English First, I used to ask my teachers as well. So when you have a class, you have the attendance list, right? So at the attendance list, you need to write down every student based on your first time meeting them, right? So basically, let's say, okay, so when you are assessing them, you need to write down, let's say, what their interests are, what their hobbies are, what their struggles are, what their strengths, weaknesses, and so on. So that way, when you want to assess them in the future, you're assessing them based on their individual skills, not based on everybody else in the class, right? So I think that would be very effective, I would say, when it comes to anticipating for this time-consuming problem there is. Then the last one, challenges with uniformity. Again, Mr. Kusen has already mentioned it, right? Because it's very difficult to apply standards. So how do we say, let's say, when the student is actually able to pass the grade so that they can go to good universities in the future? If we're just using competency-based assessment, we are not able to do it. So that's why we don't just do competency-based assessment. My suggestion is it needs to be implemented, but that's not the only thing that you're using when you're assessing your students. So that's why I will show it to you what my plan is when I'm using all these sort of assessments that I need to use in class. Okay, so before I go there, this is just a bit of example, right? So if you want to put them into action, so let's say you want to teach the students and you want to make sure that you're doing all these assessments. How can I do it, right? So because like this is my first time doing it. Maybe I'm a first-year teacher, so I'm still struggling with even assessing traditionally. So how can I even do this right now? So this is just some examples how you can do it, right? So the first one, you need to set your objectives. So these are just some examples of the objectives that you can do. So first, maybe we'll talk about grade 7 students. Let's say you're teaching grade 7s. So your objectives, what you need to teach them maybe in this lesson is they need to be able to describe their daily routines using simple present tense. They need to understand and use time expressions such as in the morning, at night, every day, etc. And the third one, ask and answer questions about daily routines. So we want students to be able to do these. So then let's say you have finished teaching them and so on, right? You have prepared your lesson plans and so on. But then it comes to the end. So when you want to assess whether students have fully understood or they have fully comprehended your materials. So then we want to do formative assessment. For example, we give students a daily routine worksheet. So we want students to answer based on what they understand. So the worksheet includes matching time expressions with activities. So in the morning with have breakfast, fill in the blank sentences, I blah, blah, blah at 7 a.m., for example, right? So will they be able to use wake up, or they will say go to sleep? The next one, a short writing test. Write about your typical day. Will they be able to say, let's say, I wake up at 7 a.m., I eat breakfast, I eat lunch, I eat dinner, I go to sleep. Just that, right? If they're able to use it that way, that means, oh, okay, so they have actually used all these objectives that I'm teaching them today. Then you want to review the answers to the class, providing immediate feedback, because that's the way formative assessments work, right? Because based on what we are assessing them, the results, we understand like, oh, I need to go over these, I need to go over that. Or maybe if it's on an individual level, maybe just one student is having difficulty with that, we're assigning extra tasks for that one student, maybe give an extra homework just for that specific problem that they're having in class. Then we want to assess them based on the competency-based assessment, right? So the objectives remain the same. We don't change it at all because we want to assess students to be able to do this, and we want to achieve mastery, right? We don't want students to just, when we're talking about formative, that means like, okay, they understand, they'll be able to do it. But then when we're talking about competency, they fully are able to use it without us helping them, without any guidance, and so on. So then what we can do, for example, how can I assess students based on their competency? First one, I can ask students to describe their daily routine in 2 to 3 sentences using the present simple tense. So you can see here, right? I'm not giving them any worksheets. I'm not giving them any context. It's just basically giving them assessment and will they be able to do it or not? But we don't have to say like, oh, this is an assessment. We just ask them. So for example, I can ask Ms. Wafa, right? So Ms. Wafa, can you tell me what you do in the morning and the afternoon and in the evening, right? Just those 3 things. Then if Ms. Wafa says, I have breakfast at 8:30 in the morning, I have lunch at maybe 12:30 in the afternoon, and then I go to a martial arts class at 5 p.m. in the afternoon. Perfect, right? So that means they are able to do it, they're competent. So that means they have passed. So that's just an example how you can assess them based on their competency. Then the last one, what's really interesting is the summative, right? Because at the end, this is what actually determines if the students actually have passed the grade or not, because we have to assess them somehow. So summative assessment will ask them to write and present a description of a classmate's daily routine. Students will interview a partner, take notes on their daily routine. They will then write a short paragraph describing their partner's routine and present it to the class. So it's more formal, as I've mentioned, right? There's multiple instructions that need to be done. And they also understand that this is not a natural thing. It's not something that we're asking them like, oh, can you tell me about your daily routine? It's not about that, but it's almost like a project, right? They have to do it out of their natural instinct that this is not something that they typically do on a daily basis, but they need to do it so that this is to be counted towards the grade. So that's the difference. So for example, they can answer such and such, right? Maria wakes up at 7:30 and so on. So then at the end, we also need to assess them based on the success criteria that we set earlier, but then we put it in writing because somehow we need to justify our grades. For example, let's say, why do we give students a 4 out of 4 for their accuracy? Why is it 3 out of 4 in their fluency? Why is it 2 out of 4 in content? And maybe if it's speaking, pronunciation, if it's writing, it's punctuation. So we need to justify based on our grading criteria. Okay, so those are just some examples. So this is the model that the Atlas team has created. So previously, we didn't include the competency-based assessment when we talk about this assessment. But if we have to add it there, basically, we add it in the middle. So for those of you who haven't seen this yet, I'll explain that this works from the left to the right side. But it's not that difficult to see. But if you see it, it looks like an arrow hitting the mark, right? Because that's what it is to be, that whatever you're assessing needs to somehow be aligned with the target aim itself. So what you need to do first, let's say you want to take it step by step, right? You're starting at the beginning of the academic year again, or this is the beginning of the next semester. Maybe you want to do it for a semester or two. You can do diagnostic assessment and observation. Then you can start teaching based on what you deem they are able to understand. If let's say we can start from maybe not the very beginning, sure, we'll start from where they left off in the previous grade. So we scaffold, we introduce new concept, then we give them some controlled practice, then we do the formative assessment like we have seen today, right? So the worksheet and so on. Then we do the competency assessment. Then we do it all over again, right? Based on what they need to work on again. And then sometimes we need to add some of the new concepts as well in the middle. But it does not mean that once they have done that assessment that we are neglecting that previous topic. We need to carry it over. If they're still struggling, we need to go over that again, then we can bring it over. Same thing again, all the way, competency-based again, review it again, then so on until the very end. We hit the summative assessment according to the learning objectives. That's when you are compiling all the learning objectives that you want students to achieve, basically. Then that's when you know that you have hit the mark. So that's the way it works. Feel free to take a screenshot of it. We have actually posted it on Instagram. I believe Ms. Wafa will also post it on Instagram later on as well, so you can see it later too. Okay, so I think it comes to the end of my presentation for today. So I want to show you how Atlaz does it. So we actually have also included all of these into our products. So for example, we have something called the quizzes. So quizzes actually are our form of formative assessments that can be found in every unit. So we have 6 units in every book. That means there are 6 quizzes that students can take from. And because these are formative, the students are able to retake it as much as possible until they get 100%. Or if they just finish and you feel like they're okay with just 90% or 80%, it's up to you. But basically, they just need to finish it at the end of every unit. And the reason why we allow students to take it as much as possible, because this is formative. Formative is not based on grades, because students are not being graded on them, but they are supposed to go over things that students are still struggling with, and they need to understand, they need to revisit it again and again until they master it, basically. Then we also have the classroom assessments. So these are actually the summative. So same like the quizzes, these are actually found in every unit as well. So we have 6 in every book. So we can see we are assessing students very comprehensively. So starting from their vocabulary, then we go to grammar, then we go to reading, listening, writing, and also speaking. And since we are also available digitally as well, the writing and also the speaking, they're also being auto-graded by the system. So the speaking is coming in the next academic year, but the writing is already done. So basically what I'm saying is that when students are using Atlaz and when you're assigning them these classroom assessments, all you need to do is just sit and wait, and you need to check their answers, and that's it. But you don't need to grade them as much as before, because the AI is actually helping you to do it. So the AI is helping students to basically analyze their writing. So it will show you based on the rubric that Atlaz has already provided. So there's a standardized rubric that Atlaz already provides for every single unit that students need to achieve. So for example, let's say if we're talking about the writing assessment for this unit, daily routines. So competency-wise, the 4 out of 4 will be such and such. If it's 3 out of 4, such and such, 2 out of 4, 1 out of 4, and so on. And you as a teacher have the full authority, full transparency in terms of seeing our grading criteria as well. So you can access all of them in our online learning. So once you have downloaded them, you can see, oh, okay, so that's what my students are being graded on. And don't worry, because at the end, you as a teacher also have the full authority if you need to somehow add some comments or remove some comments, maybe change the grades as well. So basically, everything can still be customized by the teachers. Why? Because again, as I've mentioned previously, we believe the teachers know their students the best. So yes, the AI will help us to reduce our administrative tasks, make learning more personalized for the students, help us analyze students for their individuality as well. But then at the end, it's still the teachers who know their students best. So think of it as this is your helper. So don't think of it as this is something that will replace you, because the technology will never replace teachers. And we also have Atlas Teach. So basically, if you need to do some sort of more fun gamification type of assessments, you can do it this way as well, right? So you can make the questions online, then you can distribute it to the students. They can access it with their own gadgets, or if you're doing it in a computer lab, or even if you're doing it together as groups in class, maybe just bring in 2 devices, you can also do it that way, right? So students can also answer and you can also basically navigate through the quiz with them. And this is what it looks like in our books as well. So we have the review section in every unit as well. So you don't have to worry about, let's say, what if my students need more practice? So that's actually the very least type of question that we're getting, because we actually provide more than what you actually need in class. The reason is because we understand that when it comes to learning languages, it takes practice, right? It's maybe for one student, they do one type of exercise and that's it. But certain students might take more than one exercise to actually master it. So we have provided all of it for you. So you can imagine, right, in the book itself, we have a lot. We have more in the online learning. And then, so a lot of practice. So you don't need to worry about running out of ideas in your classes. And this is what it looks like in our AI writing evaluator. So you can see on the top left-hand side there, right? So for example, let's say this is what's your favorite color? Describe one thing you have in that color. Then the student answers, my favorite color is blue. I have a blue t-shirt. I want to have a blue car. So then the AI will give the response to that, right? So with the competence, it's we had a 4, maybe the lexical, the grammar, and punctuation. But again, you can change anything that you need to alter at the end. Then on the right side, we also have the teacher feedback generator. So something that actually is pretty aligned with our competency-based assessment topic today, because it will generate students' data and it will analyze everything. So based on what students have worked on. For example, you can see maybe, let's say, in the first unit, the students maybe failed to assess anything, to get assessed on anything. But then in unit 2, they get better and better, but then somehow it drops again. So this AI will help you to analyze the trend. So you don't have to worry if you have, let's say, 36 students, the AI will give individualized comment based on each student. Because that's our limit, right? As teachers, sometimes we don't have the time. It's not that we don't want to do it, but we are very limited. If we're teaching 300 students, then how can we be sure that we are assessing them correctly, that we're providing the right feedback for each one of them? So let the AI do it for you. So all you need to do is you can read it and you can see if you agree with it or not. You can just alter it as well if you need to change it. But I figured that this is a very helpful tool for teachers, so you can provide more personalized feedback for your students. And we also have the lesson plan generator that's coming next. That will be also aligned with the national curriculum, so you don't have to worry about any changing curriculum in the future. Then we also have the Tanya Zalta as well. So that's our personalized tutor that teachers can ask any questions as you want when you're using Atlas system, or students as well, if let's say they're having difficulties. But you don't have to worry, because this won't be available for students when they're doing assessments, because our assessments are actually very strict. We have anti-cheating system that basically students will have to be in front of their device at all time, and they can't really be moving out of that window, because once they move out of the window, then it will be considered cheating, and it will be submitted automatically. So that's something that I feel you don't have to worry about. But so all these helpful tools are to be used by you and the students as much as you want. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it. So I will give it back to Ms. Walker first before we move on to the question and answer session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kevin, for your thoughtful presentation. Maybe langsung saja we move on to our next session. Does anyone have any question to Mr. Kevin? Bapak dan Ibu bisa um, raise hand untuk bertanya kepada Mr. Kevin, lalu boleh memperkenalkan nama dan juga sekolah ataupun lokasi tinggalnya, dan juga dapat bertanya melalui kolom chat. Silahkan Bapak Ibu. Sambil menunggu, aku mungkin izin mengingatkan Bapak Ibu untuk link absensi akan dikirimkan setelah webinarnya selesai. Lalu Bapak dan Ibu harus mengisi 2 keywords dari masing-masing speaker. Jadi keywords yang pertama adalah feedback driven learning, dan setelah ini akan kita tunggu keywords dari Mr. Kevin. Mungkin apakah ada pertanyaan? Mungkin Mr. Kevin, aku mau nanya sedikit. Sekiranya Mr. Kevin sudah pernah atau belum menerapkan competency-based assessment di kelas bahasa Inggris, dan sekiranya apa sih tantangan yang telah Mr. Kevin rasakan dan bagaimana cara menyelesaikannya?
All right, thank you so much for the question, Ms. Wafa. I think there's like a question that's coming, but I'll answer it after this. So I did something called, so basically when I was still teaching very intensively back then, that we had this sometimes graduation ceremonies for our students. So I think that's something that I think it's really, really useful for us. It's like a showcase for every student what they have actually learned throughout the year, basically. So they can show it to their friends, their teachers, and also their parents what they have actually achieved. So then basically during this graduation ceremony, we're assigning students projects. So for example, let's say we'll talk about restaurants, let's say about food and drinks. So we want students to maybe do a role play. So maybe one of them becomes the waiter, one of them becomes the customer, and they have to present in front, right? But what I like about it is that, yes, it does show, let's say, because they have practiced it a lot as well, right? So it does show their mastery on the skill. But also when we're doing it that way, we are differentiating it too. Because when we're assigning that project, then every group or every student can choose how they want to do it. Because we're not giving them scripts. We're not giving them any guidance, right? So we just tell them like, oh, basically you need to be in a restaurant, there will be like a waiter and a customer. So then the rest is up to you, how you want to lay out the dialogues. But then, of course, the struggle, as Ms. Wapa has asked as well, sometimes there are some students who are still struggling. So maybe they are maybe 2 or 3 students who are still struggling, so they are not able to form it themselves. So they cannot actually build the dialogues themselves. So then what you need to do as a teacher is you need to provide the support. So sometimes you need to give out some prompts or even give models so that the student can follow. And that's okay. It's perfectly fine if, let's say, that certain students follow exactly what you gave them previously, or some students, maybe they do their own thing completely. That's fine. Because at the end, it's about showing that they have reached that mastery. And I think that's what I like about it. And I wish that we could do more of it at school as well, that it becomes a form of assessment, that it's not just a showcase, right? So then the assessment doesn't have to be about taking tests anymore, but it's about showing that they're able to do it in that sense. And it also builds the students' self-confidence that they need to actually build. So we're not just talking about English skills, but it's about presentation skills. It's about building self-confidence as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Kevin. Maybe my point of view from a student, maybe if I have a competency-based assessment, I don't have any self-confidence to do it. So maybe that's the tantangan terbesar untuk seorang muridnya ya. Mungkin kita move on to the next question from Ibu Fatmawati. Is the focus of competency-based assessment only on productive skills?
All right, really good question. So actually for competency-based assessment, it's not just for one type of skill. So it can be applied for any skills. So let's say if you want to assess specifically, maybe let's say, I think it depends on what grade you're teaching. If I'm teaching grade 1, for example, grade 1 students, then obviously maybe they don't speak as much yet because they don't know the language as much, or they don't read quite well, right? Because they are only reading words. They don't know how to read sentences yet. So then what I want to assess, instead of assessing their speaking or even their productive skills or writing, maybe I want to start by assessing their vocabulary skills first. So I get very specific, right? So let's say, are they able to say certain words? Maybe when we are presenting them with pictures, will they be able to define what these pictures are. Or maybe let's say if I give them some ideas, let's say in terms of feeling, we'll talk about feeling today. How do you feel? Maybe I feel excited, I feel sad, when they see smiley faces. So will that give them some sort of ideas? If they are able to formulate that sentence, right, that I feel excited, that means I have successfully taught them how to use that word in terms of how they are conveying their feeling. So that's just an example. But yes, the answer is not just for productive skill. It can be used for any type of skills.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Kevin. Semoga menjawab, Ibu Fatmawati. Maybe pertanyaan terakhir dari Mr. Wahid. Halo, Mr. Wahid. Can you tell me your name and your domicile? Hello, Mr. Wahid. Maybe you still. Nah. Okay, hello, sir. Maybe
He's going somewhere likely.
maybe there is an error with Mr. Wahid. Mr. Wahid, maybe you can type on the chat box. Okay, another one, Miss Rima. The assessment showed the wide variety of students' competency. How to arrange the material to them?
All right, very, very nice. So I think it comes to that's actually the challenge that Mr. Kusen has mentioned earlier, right? So you have a wide variety of students, they have different competencies. How can you be sure of arranging the right materials to them? So that goes back to differentiation. So basically, you need to be able to categorize your students based on their well, not just proficiency, but based on their interests, based on their capabilities of doing things. So not just in terms of language, but maybe let's say if we're talking about really, really young learners, right? Motor skills as well. Are they able to already formulate words, sentences? Are they able to write? Are they able to even hold pencils correctly? So all these factors need to be taken into place when it comes to assessments. But what I want to, I would say, give tips on is that basically when you are differentiating, that you are not changing the materials as much. You can adapt the materials, but don't change the materials too much. Because the reason is you don't have as much time to figure out all these different materials to be taught in class. Because if that's the case, then it turns into, well, I would say not a classroom, but more into a cram school, right? It's like it becomes a tutor session where you just come to different places with all different subjects. But we don't want that to happen. So still focus on one thing. Let's say you want to focus on like what we talk about today, right? Maybe describing students' daily routines using present tense. Then you can differentiate based on what students have already known, what they have not known at all. Then you can also do the what is that called? The little teacher, the one that Mr. Kusen has also suggested earlier, as the strong ones to help out the weaker ones as well. So divide the groups very effectively. And my suggestion, as I talk about this in my differentiation webinar as well, is that your groups do not have to be the same groups all the time. So it depends on the need. So if let's say for the need for today's lesson, you need to differentiate based on, okay, some of them are weak with one strong student, the other ones as well. Or sometimes you want to do, let's say, all the strong ones together so they can have a more useful discussions. Then all the weaker ones together so you can help out with the weaker ones more while the strong ones are doing another project. So it really depends. But my suggestion is still stick to the same topic, still stick to the same theme that you want to bring to class, but it's about adapting the activities, how you want the students to do them, how you want to differentiate that in a sense.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Kevin.
Sure. Okay. Is everything okay with Mr. Wahid? Okay. All right. So let's try again, Mr. Wahid. Okay. Or maybe Mr. Whitehead is experiencing the issue that I experienced with my computer earlier today. When I tried to turn my camera on, that it automatically turns off right away. That sometimes we have to update our Zoom, maybe. But please feel free to write down the questions, Mr. Wahid, so I can also give the answers, and maybe Ms. Wafa can send it to you personally later. Will that be okay, Ms. Wafa?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Kevin. So, Bapak and Ibu, maybe if you have another question, you can ask Mr. Kevin or Mr. Kusen via our Instagram at hi.atlas, or maybe you can contact Maya on WhatsApp. Okay, so Mr. Kevin, I want to ask the keywords for our audience today.
All right. So I was thinking about a quite long word. It was like alignment, but then I want to change it because I think it'll be too hard for you guys to type. So I'll just change it to just target aim. Really easy.
Okay, target aim.
Yes, just target aim. It's because I want everybody to remember that whatever you are assessing, basically it needs to be related to what your aim is. So we need to get out of that zone of we have to assess students, we have to give exams, we have to give tests. It's not about the tests themselves, but it's about assessing students' ability. That's basically what I want you to remember. So the target aim.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Kevin. So, Bapak and Ibu, jangan lupa untuk mengingat dua keywords yang telah diberikan oleh dua speaker kami pada hari ini. Yang pertama ada feedback driven learning, dan yang kedua ada target aim. Dua keywords ini bisa digunakan, harus digunakan untuk mengisi presensi yang akan kami kirim setelah event selesai. Okay, now once again, thank you so much, Mr. Kevin. May the knowledge and materials present be beneficial to all our speakers here. Okay, before we move on to our next session, maybe Bapak dan Ibu, saya mengundang Bapak dan Ibu untuk foto bersama. Saya mengundang juga kepada Mr. Kusen dan juga Mr. Kevin untuk foto bersama. Boleh Bapak dan Ibu jika ingin membuka kamera? Saya tunggu. Oke. Wow, finally saya melihat wajah-wajah baru di sini. Selamat sore Bapak dan Ibu semua. Oke, Bapak dan Ibu jika ingin melihat keywordnya sudah ada dikirimkan oleh operator Atlas di chat box. Oke, masih ada lagi yang ingin membuka kamera? Mungkin sudah. Saya bantu untuk screenshot. Oke, 1, 2, 3. Oke, sekali lagi. 1, 2, 3. Oke, thank you so much Bapak dan Ibu. Terakhir sebelum saya memberikan link presensi, saya ingin mengumumkan bahwa Atlas memberikan promo 50% di Shopee dan jangan lupa gunakan voucher Atlas 22NO untuk klaim promo setengah harga dari produk Atlas. Beli produk buku Atlas sekarang, dapatkan ekosistem pengajaran bahasa Inggris terlengkap melalui Atlaz Academy. Silakan gunakan promo ini sebelum di tanggal 29 November 2024. Bisa gunakan melalui tata cara yang dikirimkan oleh operator kami. Ya, oke, sudah dikirimkan link absensinya. Silakan Bapak Ibu untuk mengisi link absensi dan jangan lupa kami akan mengirimkan sertifikat kepada Bapak dan Ibu melalui email dan jangan lupa untuk menunggu paling lambat di tanggal 29 November 2024, jadi di Jumat depan. Baik, Bapak dan Ibu, apabila memiliki pertanyaan ataupun ingin berkonsultasi dengan Atlas, boleh menghubungi Instagram kami lewat DM Instagram @hi.atlas atau hubungi Maya lewat WhatsApp. Thank you so much Bapak Ibu for attending this webinar. Terima kasih banyak Bapak Kusen dan juga Mr. Kevin telah mengisi webinar ini. Sekian dari saya. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Ms. Wafa, Mr. Kusen. See you guys.
Jadi guru itu harus esa sabar. Tidak jarang murid mengalami kesulitan, namun tidak berani bertanya.
Kadang capek dan bosan. Setiap sebelum ngajar harus buat dan update lesson plan. Ditambah lagi kemampuan dan kebutuhan siswa itu berbeda-beda. Harus ditanya satu persatu di mana permasalahannya. Tapi setelah saya mencoba pakai Atlaz, motivasi belajar murid saya meningkat tajam. Karena selain memiliki buku interaktif dan LMS yang user-friendly, metode pembelajarannya juga menarik dan mudah dimengerti. Lalu saya merekomendasikan ke teman guru bahasa Inggris yang lain.
Atlaz memang merupakan solusi yang selama ini saya cari. Kini, murid saya jadi jago berbahasa Inggris karena terus belajar dan praktek dengan video pembelajaran bahasa Inggris di rumah.
Syukur sekarang ada Atlaz. Banyak pilihan metode ajar dan media pembelajaran up to date. Tanpa kursus, guru tenang, murid senang.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Perkenalkan, nama saya Nur Afrima dari SMP Model Ariat Insan Cendekia Bekasi. Di sini saya mengajar bahasa Inggris. Kesan pertama menggunakan LMS Atlaz. Sangat penasaran dengan isi dari materi-materi yang diberikan oleh tim Atlaz dan juga tentang worksheet-nya terlebih itu. Karena ketika menggunakan LMS Atlaz ini tidak hanya materi yang mudah dipahami oleh para siswa, tetapi juga memudahkan kita sebagai teachers terkait tentang result-result di skill listening seperti itu. Kesan positif dari anak-anak pun juga saya dapatkan ketika mereka menggunakan LMS Atlaz maupun buku dari tim Atlaz sendiri. Anak-anak menyampaikan bahwasanya bukunya itu sangat menarik karena banyak gambar, banyak video-video yang nanti bisa mereka putar di LMS-nya. Jadi ketika anak-anak belum paham materi-materinya di sekolah, ketika kita berdiskusi bersama dari penyampaian materi dari saya sebagai guru bahasa Inggrisnya, mereka bisa mempelajari kembali dari LMS di rumah masing-masing. Seperti itu. Overall dari saya untuk Atlaz, LMS-nya memang good job.
Terima kasih banyak